So not long ago, Belvoir Souls wrote this article about 40K getting better representation. Now this is the updated version than what originally came out. But what they were trying to do was talk about how 40K needed to be more inclusive. And they obviously were not taking any influences from other people. And then they were doing, that thing that everybody seems to do when this conversation comes up, which is praise the Eldar and act like they're incredibly important and are not a tremendous fucking problem in the fan base right now, or the metagame or anything else. For a number of reasons that I can explain myself later, but I'm sure no one cares. That's neither here nor there. The issue was that the response that they got on social media to this article was not liked. So they allowed the admin of a Facebook group called Feminist 40K respond on their webpage as a guest columnist, on like Prime billing on their page as a guest columnist, to come back and tell all the haters and all the trolls and what have you that they were wrong and that they have no idea what they're talking about. And please don't notice the fact that the Facebook group that I run actually doesn't talk about 40K lore or 40K rules or the tabletop or the RPGs. They just post pictures of themselves and other people's armies. Alright, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I didn't need to put them down that hard that fast, but whatever. Feminist 40K admins respond. Last week's discussion, I'm glad that they call it a discussion. You can almost hear the the voice is just dripping. It's absolutely just venomously dripping. It's conceit. Last week's discussion was spurred by a post from this Facebook group. This is their stance, in their own words. The following was written by the Feminist 40K group admins. Warhammer 40,000 has been around for a long time, more than 20 years in fact. In that time, a veritable ton of writing and rewriting, nice use of ton there, has gone into the fictional universe, attracting players of all age groups and hobbyist miniature tabletop wargaming with an equally active online player base for its video game equivalents. No, not really. That's pretty wrong there. The majority of the people who play their video games are not actually active anymore because the only good 40K games have had all of their servers taken offline, or they're so old that nobody actually pays attention to them anymore. Cough, cough, Dawn of War 1, cough, cough, Space Marine, cough, cough, nothing else. However, like all fandoms, it has its dark underbelly, a tribal and woefully toxic, oh boy, here's those words again, I'm sure all of you know about those adjectives, toxic group of players who seek to isolate and protect their fandom at all costs. Alright, fuck you, it is theirs. Firstly. The majority of 40K fans I don't even agree with, and this channel is pretty much dedicated to shitting on a lot of them. In a kind of backwards way that people will figure out eventually, but like the pretending that these people aren't the primary fan base for this and that they didn't actually do it. It's really something for everyone, just like Magic the Gathering and Marvel Comics. All of those seem to be for everyone, and every time they are for everyone, they kind of go to shit, don't they? Oh man, I'm already getting off track. Protect their fandom at all costs, similar to a child screaming over their section of the playground when it's to be shared by everyone. Really, really off-base metaphor. Nice propaganda technique there. This has plagued the fandom for generations. No, it hasn't. While not exclusive to the game, has turned off many players who feel uncomfortable playing a hobby that requires interaction with such folk. Okay. At least you're still calling them people instead of devolving into calling them subhuman right off the bat like the rest of you fuckers normally do. A sample of such fine behavior includes, but is not limited to, demeaning and crass treatment of women in game stores, condoning racist and abhorrent behavior towards minorities or disabled persons, online harassment, and shaming other people for daring to enjoy the same hobby. I would quote Teal Deer and say citation needed, but that's implied because the I hope everybody who ever actually listens to this knows exactly why this is bullshit, because unless they're literally going only to 4chan and 8chan to talk about it, the 40k community has been cowed into the corner of being like some of the most docile people ever. Because almost everywhere they go is either like a pseudo forum marketing site controlled by GW, a la Bell of Lost Souls right here, or it's a forum dedicated to a specific sect of the fandom that has to do with like one specific army subfaction or macro faction, such as like Bolter and Chainsword and Daka Daka, and almost all of those that like you don't get to curse. You don't get to make sexist comments, quote unquote. You don't get to make racist comments, quote unquote. Like and then like the demeaning and crass treatment of women in game stores. This is bullshit of the highest order, because the majority of the time that happens, it's usually because like if it is actual demeaning and crass treatment, maybe there's some cases where it's horrible, but in my experience, and in the experience of pretty much everyone I've ever known, anytime that there's a problem, like there's demeaning and crass treatment, or whatever they would call demeaning and crass treatment of women in the game store, it's because the woman is not there to game. She's there for attention. And people don't like that, and they tell her to leave. And she translates that as, they're going to lynch me. Or she tells people that she translated that as, they're going to lynch me, and therefore we have to fucking accommodate for her because she's the victim suddenly. And apropos of that, like aside from that whole thing, the other side of the coin with this, with demeaning and crass treatment of women in game stores, what fucking women in game stores? What are you talking about? Like, the majority of women that go to game stores don't play 40k. The vast majority of women who do play 40k play it because their boyfriends and husbands play it, and they want to do something with them as a couple's activity. There's very, very few female players of Warhammer 40k, and as we will discuss further on, they don't play the armies you think they do. It is one thing to deny the existence and experiences of the many players, many citation needed, who have faced such treatment by self-proclaimed fans, quote-unquote. Fuck yourself. It is another altogether to condone and partake in such behavior, and this has forced many of us in the community to shun open spaces for fear of inviting anything from rape threats to unsolicited advances from these shining examples of humanity. Unsolicited opinions about Israel. Once again. Woo. Look, that is quite possibly some of the most over-the-top shit that could be said about 40k or its community, which is hilarious considering what 40k is. You're not going to get rape threats from 40k fans. The worst thing they will do is systematically keep buying Space Marines so every other faction gets screwed into the ground. That you know, and as much as I want to fucking rage against the SJW menace that is currently trundling its way through all spheres of gaming communities, a sample of such fine behavior, you know, it is another altogether to condone and partake in such behavior, and this has forced many of us in the community to shun open spaces for fear of inviting anything from rape threats to unsolicited advances from these shining examples of humanity. Feminist 40k is a closed community, and that is not because we want to be, but because we have to be. Yeah, you have to be, because if you were an open community, everybody would join, and they would immediately point out that you guys don't know shit from Shinola about anything in 40k, even by the 13-year-old Space Marine player standards. You guys don't actually play the tabletop. You don't play any of the RPGs. You hardly play any of the video games that aren't pieces of shit. And as an aside, if you say, oh man, Dawn of War 3 is cool, or something like that, because you think MOBAs are a real genre, I want you to know that you don't count either. Like, you guys posted pictures of other people's armies and talk about like the paint quality and how models look good. You don't actually talk about the conversion process or painting or building these things. You're posting the finished work of other people without understanding what goes into it and just going, wow, it's so cool. I wish I had the money to do that. If only GW would lower their prices. Maybe they should give like female players a 50% discount or something. You talk about that. You talk about you know, really hard left-leaning sociopolitics about this, but you're not going to talk about the actual game. So you never do. None of you people do. That's why you're always making safe spaces, because if anybody ever points that out actively enough to your inside, it makes your brain hurt. So you all just throw everybody out. You won't let your bubble be burst because it's the only thing that protects you from reality. A picture of one of the first editions of 40K for some reason, or a box set for some reason, I don't know why. Why are such over-the-top reactions up against? What are such over-the-top reactions up against? Why the horror of questioning, quote-unquote, the lore, of course. Alright, you're not questioning the lore. You're demanding a change in the status quo. I'm questioning the lore. Warhammer 40,000 is built upon decades of continuously rewritten and fluid fiction, with changes made to reflect the times of Games Workshop player base. At some point, women and minorities start to challenge the necessity of certain elements, such as the unnecessary sexualization of female-oriented miniatures to the lack of representation in model choice, and request Games Workshop to expand their selection as to include everyone in the mass carnage that is the 41st millennium. Alright, they've always been included. They've always been included. What the fuck are you talking about? The majority of factions in 40K are gender inclusive or totally genderless, and it doesn't matter. The only ones that aren't are Space Marines, which I can get your confusion considering that they are like beyond the face of the game. They're basically what GW wants the game to only be about, and fuck everybody else. But pretending that the Tau, the Eldar, like every subfaction of Eldar, pretending that every subfaction of the Tau Empire, pretending that, you know, there's no such thing as Sisters of Battles or Chaos Cultists, which you guys bring up later, but you do this thing that every other social justice warrior group that infiltrates a gaming community always does, where you take a wedge issue that was already in the group's community and then push it against one side and pretend the other side doesn't exist, and just propagandize until nobody actually like acts like there's any drawbacks to your position. This whole thing is a double-edged sword. People have complained about like the lack of diversity in model types for a lot of reasons, but it's stuff like I want to see plastic guardsmen that aren't Cadians or Catechans. That's not so hard to ask. I want to see plastic Sisters of Battle, but GW just wants to make Space Marines. And they have ignored their entire fan base this whole time, but because some of your friends got into the HR department at GW, now they're suddenly going to make female Space Marines or something stupid because you whined on the internet. You have this whole thing handed to you because you cheated, and you don't know what you're doing. I'll get to the sexualization of female-oriented miniatures later. The vitriolic reaction to this, asking others to treat each other fairly, is both astonishing and frustratingly common. No, they treated you more than fairly, you just keep trying to take more. Aside from the individual harassment of our players, you don't have players. There have been attempts at banning our page. Okay, no there haven't. You're on Facebook, and you have the word feminist in your name, and without the words anti in front of it. You're never going to get banned, and you know that. Fuck off. Concerted efforts to shut us down. They can't. No, there haven't been. And continuous defamation and bullying online for the audacity of challenging established canon. Okay. It's not bullying if you're just an asshole and you're trying to take away something from people. And it's not defamation if you're the one who's lying. You don't have the audacity of challenging established canon. You're trying to change something. You're trying to demand a change that would require an entire new model line that that has no basis in the game or anything around the game surrounding the game other than because of your feelings and your personal politics. Which has been changed time and again for varying reasons. Alright, it has been retconned, but overall there's differences. Even amongst the 40K lore community that I generally hate, even them with their sophomoric readings of the lore, they still understand the difference between an addition to addition retcon and what you're talking about. You'd almost think that they hated the hobby with the amount of anger directed at our members. Well, I'm pretty close to hating the hobby, but I don't direct the anger at your members because of that. I direct the anger at your members because they're pieces of shit. Change is integral to keeping media fresh and exciting. Take the Dark Imperium series of releases by Games Workshop, for example. Deaths of named characters and planets. What named characters actually died? The only planet that was really destroyed was Cadia. Returning Primarchs. What Primarchs? Just one returned. Mortarion was never missing. He was a demon Primarch. New factions and miniatures. Alright. Once again, what are you talking about? These new minis, they're not really all that new. They're just bigger Space Marines. They're just bigger Space Marines, and they're gay tanks that look like kit bashes that somebody else made, and GW, like, forgot how to actually pay their sculptors again. Like, and none of this actually keeps anything fresh and exciting. This whole thing has been as predictable as a Mexican soap opera. All of these involve heavy lore changes and retcons. Yeah, that nobody has approved of, yet you're somehow acting like, because there's like the minority of voices that think Primaris Marines aren't a tremendous fucking problem, that somehow your argument has any kind of credence. And it only bodes well for a hobby that is older than many of its modern enthusiasts. No, it's not. The majority of the people that have kept 40k alive are like older than 40k. But pretending that the majority of 40k fans are like teenagers and young adults that never actually played the tabletop is bullshit that was sold to you by... It's bullshit sold to you by GW because that's the main demographic that buys Space Marines without thinking, hey, maybe Space Marines are kind of fucking lame. Change is neither inherently good nor bad, but there could not be a more perfect time to ask for a wider series of models when new ideas are being tossed about in the boardrooms of Games Workshop. God, I really hope there's not new ideas being tossed around in the boardrooms. Those people have no idea what they're doing. They have never had any idea what they were doing. Take Adeptus Sororitas armor. It emphasizes the female figure to a sexualized level. No, it doesn't. Not very glaring on its own, but alongside nearly naked, repentant fanatics, a long-running mistreatment in both in-game lore and GW codexes, and a lack of relatively cheap and updated armies, it's hard for women, or indeed anyone keen on having female models, to not take that as a statement that GW just doesn't care much for its female player base. Alright, firstly, fuck you. Secondly, fuck you. Thirdly, Sisters of Battle have never had anything to do with the female player base. Sisters of Battle were created because the art team at the time really liked heavy metal. Sisters of Battle have to look like they do because the entirety of the lore is dependent on it, and that was the whole idea. It's part of the aesthetic of 40k, and trying to remove that whole... Like, 40k basically only has survived on its aesthetic thus far. Everything else is everything else of substance has been systematically removed by Games Workshop. Pretending that power armor is sexualized or something when it's for warrior nuns that are supposed to look like they came out of the 80s is patently ridiculous. Because it means that you didn't read anything that surrounds them. You just looked at them and made a decision about it and then refused to take any context into mind. Which is half of what your argument is based in, is that all of these decisions that GW is making... Your argument essentially is all these decisions that GW is making are nonsense because the context of them is that they are not thinking of... They're not thinking of the greater context of the female fan base. But then you're going ahead and fucking removing all this other stuff out of context and then saying, no, this is what it is, you don't get to tell me otherwise. It's very obvious that this group of admins, there was probably just one dude, all of you, if the case may be, or just you, don't actually know what you're talking about. It's... relatively cheap. I guess relative is the operative word here. Updated armies. Sisters of Battle haven't been updated in forever because other feminist groups have made GW embarrassed about them, so they haven't bothered to. And also, they're not fucking Space Marines, that's why. They and Grey Knights used to have the smallest fan bases ever. The player base for Sisters of Battle and Grey Knights and Inquisition was about the size of like was just a little bit bigger than like the player bases for armies that weren't actually officially in the game, but were in like supplements and White Dwarf articles and like campaign books. I have met more Lost Damned players and Kroot Mercenaries players than I have met Sisters of Battle or any kind of Inquisition players. Grey Knights escaped that hell because they're Space Marines and they get additional, they get gibbies, they get additional gimmies. And Matt Ward thought they were the coolest shit ever when he was writing them. Look, the crux of this, the issue here, is that all of that can be taken aside. I don't even need to talk to you about like the sexualized armor or whatever your point might be, because the majority of the female fan base of 40k, like the women that actually play the tabletop, they play Tyranids. So fuck off. You don't know what you're talking about. The matter of variety in ethnicity of models also turns away minorities who prefer to be represented by more than cultural stereotypes born of the comic books and action movies of the 80s. Firstly, blame Matt Ward for that. You know, like rightfully so, for doing stuff like making the salamanders mutants instead of just black people. And like, you know, the rest of the fan base that you're shitting on has been complaining about forever. And secondly, have you seen GW's model quality? The bodies are fine, but the faces are really hard to get done. No one's telling you the way you have to paint them, so I don't know exactly what way you mean by ethnic groups. But if you want like more ethnic, quote-unquote, facial features or hairstyles or something on models, it's going to be really hard to do that when the team that does GW has man face on everything. Do you really want like them to go out of their way to make a whole line of black guardsmen and like all the faces underneath the helmets are like ridiculously like 1920s cartoon stereotypes here? Because that's what it'll probably look like if you force them at this point, because their sculptors can't do much better than generic action hero white man, because they have the most neutral, subtle, quote-unquote, facial expressions. Even if they did a perfect job reconstructing like what you consider ethnic facial features, you would still complain about it, I'm sure. So it's not there's no point. This is all just a power play trying to manipulate people once again. Why change our precious hobby? There you go, being condescending again. Then ask the frothing, furious fans who spend the better half of their day finding ways to harass other fans who also want to make small plastic soldiers kill each other. Why not find another hobby and let mine stagnate in peace? I mean, it was stagnating in peace for a while. It didn't need you to start ruining. GW was doing that on its own. But, you know, I'm glad that you came over here with this gas can for the fire. I'm sure all of that hatred is absolutely undeserved, and just being a condescending prick to them on a fucking shill website is a great way to convince people that you're in the right. Because we love Warhammer 40,000. We love its over-the-top design, its shameless lifting of tropes from pop culture, its satire of fascistic theocracy. Alright, firstly, if you love the over-the-top design, why the fuck are you asking for Sisters of Battle to be redesigned? Secondly, if it's shamelessly lifting tropes from pop culture now, what are you what the fuck do you think what it was used to be doing? And thirdly, it hasn't been a satire of fascistic theocracy in forever. It was supposed to be a satire of fascism and theocracy and everything else, but all it ended up being was a satire of Londoners' hubris modernly. They made they wrote the entire Horus Heresy to basically tell the guy who originally came up with 40k. They looked at him and when he said, "Well, you see, the Horus Heresy was supposed to be a satire of organized religion," the entirety of the writers at Black Library, when they started the Horus Heresy, went, "No, you see, the Horus Heresy actually was about how organized religion is required for a galactic empire. The Emperor did nothing wrong." No, fuck off. You once again, no idea what you're talking about. It hasn't been a satire of fascistic theocracy in forever, because every single fucking book, the theocrats and the fascists are the ones that are on the right side. They're the ones that have the better options because because GW refuses to let any other faction be written as anything but like mustache twirlingly, brain explodingly evil and doing just absolutely over the top retarded shit. It used to be that Hansu was 1 in a million. Now the way it's being written is that every other fucking villain is either Hansu, or there's some kind of anti-villain that's not actually all bad. Oh man, he's not an Elric ripoff. Those aren't getting old. Elric was a good character, we promise. 40K is a setting with many, many individual stories, and what makes it so fun is that we are free to make our own, but it could be better if Games Workshop decides to widen their market. And then shows pictures of codexes for some reason. How are they going to widen their market? How? You're not... As we discussed, you're not going to buy any of these new models. You're not going to start playing the game because suddenly Sisters of Battle got good again. If Sisters of Battle got good suddenly, what would happen? The model sales would go up because the same power gamers that play Space Marines would suddenly start playing St. Celestine and being like, look at my immortal mechanized infantry army. Haha, I'm so skilled at the game. This power creep is totally not ruining the entirety of the competitive scene that drives the tabletop to even be existing anymore. But you're not going to be there. Maybe they'll get a price bump. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe there'll suddenly be people that thinks that look at all these sales. We're doing great. GW finally turned themselves around. All they had to do was embrace progressive politics. But you're not going to be buying them. You're not going to be the people that caused any of that sale bump. It'll still be the same fans that bought more of GW's overpriced shit to do because GW has just completely fucking gone off the rail, gone over the hedge with how power creep works, and how they're trying to design their game, and how they might appeal to you anyway, because 8th edition and Age of Sigmar was basically a testing bed for what 8th edition is now, where they're trying to create the most casualized war game ever. But whatever, I'm just going off the rails here. Everyone wins. Minorities gain better representation. More options for writing and models are sold. The company makes more money and thus has more options for its player base. It's much deeper than simply changing a coat of paint or adding a pair of accentuated breasts on a chest plate. But the reactionary views of loud, stubborn dinosaurs are truly ruining the experience. And as much as they claim to be the victim. What the fuck are you talking about? Are you seriously trying to do this turnaround where you have gotten all of this... You got all this attention, all this focus on you. You have a column on one of the leading shill sites that people still pay attention to. And for some reason, you're going to go, no, they're playing the victim. I am a real victim, but I'm standing up, I'm strong. They're playing the victim because, I'm totally not infiltrating their hobby and trying to change things that have no business being changed. Representation matters. No, it doesn't. It shows people that they are recognized, that they are not simply token pieces on a board more homogenous than a vanilla cheesecake. You really don't want that bubble to pop in reality to come in, do you? It allows women to safely play the hobby without spending the whole time staring at sexualized representations of the female form. Alright, what the fuck does that have to do with them being safe to play the hobby? Even if we say for a minute that, suddenly there's going to be a huge influx of female players that'll play because now they can play women. Because, Eldar and Tyranids and Sisters of Battle didn't exist before. Okay. The sexualized representations of them was what made them feel scared, huh? That's what kept them unsafe? Not all of these horrific grognards that you've been complaining about on the other end that apparently are the problem? Yeah, they'll stop leering at them because they have more tastefully dressed models. That's what's going to happen, right? This paragraph is idiotic. It stands out as idiotic in a sea of idiotic paragraphs. Most importantly, it allows gaming to be a fun hobby without fear of being harassed online, threatened, insulted, or publicly shamed for one's preference of miniature post-humans. Here's your problem. That'll change nothing. That'll never change anything unless you're going to go and like make hate speech laws about people with different opinions than you about fucking spacemen. And as long as I'm around, you're going to be publicly shamed for having shit taste in miniatures. Fiction is written by people and subject to change. Reality, however, is affected by the choices of the writers and should take precedence over the former. Media that stagnates will not survive the times, and if there is anything we can all agree on, it should be that we have the right to enjoy rolling a series of ones and watch our army shoot itself in the face en masse. You have never played the game. You have no idea what you're talking about. That has never happened unless you're talking about Skaven, which is a whole different fucking game than this. And these comments are just awful. Oh, awaiting moderation. Yeah, actually, this guy's pretty right. 40k is not supposed to be progressive. 40k is supposed to be everyone is a villain, everything is awful, this all sucks, enjoy the catharsis. Humanity is mostly united in hate and xenophobia. It's a cornerstone of the franchise. 2. The author seems to undervalue 40k as a setting. Sure, it has lifted tropes and parodied elements or other sci-fi settings, but you can't open your eyes and see that 40k takes itself very seriously. You should probably go to another fandom. 3. In all the new female models, be the Astra Militarum, the Plastic Sisters, more Eldar. I'm all for female models in the Astra Militarum, new Plastic Sisters, more Eldars models, but not the Adeptus Astartes. Not only are there 1,000 more reasons why this doesn't happen, there's definitely biological, psychological reasons why it shouldn't. Not to mention there would be no reason for it. Sisters of Battle were created to give females a rough equivalent to the Astartes with their own strengths to go with it. This has been this way for 30 years. There's no need to change it when there's a billion other faction choices for women. Not to mention Space Marine are basically not human anymore, and therefore such things as gender and sexuality don't apply to them as they would regular humans. This is true! The amount of shit that goes into making a Space Marine would make female Space Marines, if they followed all the stuff in 40k lore, would look exactly the same. There's no point. You're saying that they keep crying representation, but in reality they want a new aesthetic choice that is something that they could do on their own for their own armies, but need it to be made official so they can feel validated because they have that little will. 4. Culture and race representations that mirror our own are pointless. Again, every genotype walking around in 2017 would have been obliterated and mutated beyond comprehension by 38,000 years of colonization on far distant worlds with different biomes, vat-grown populations, colonial inbreeding, ridiculously harsh living conditions, and roughly 10,000 years of isolationism and fear before the Imperium even became a thing. Cultures may have a basis in our history, but they are far removed, or a case where history repeated itself from our own cultures. To even categorize the Salamanders as black Space Marines and the White Scars as just Space Mongolians just serves to propagate cultural pigeonholing that just isn't necessary. You know, I guess his point is correct. I did engage in some of that, but I mean, that's mostly just shorthand. I do agree with what he's saying, though. Point in short, 40k doesn't need to reflect our current world. It is not even remotely the point. Just read the opening crawl of every codex. No matter what happens, you won't be missed. Yeah, and then this guy is the top comment in a whole chain of what I'm betting is going to be complete shit, and he was the one that was held for moderation. A notion that 40k is so far past our gnomes that it should reflect none of them as a deflection meant just justify the status quo, or more accurately, a moral state that you're comfortable with. It would shorten the conversation, just get to the heart of the matter. Would just admit that they are distressed that the no girls allowed sign was still paid attention to. Okay. Fuck yourself, sir. Just nothing. That's Bell of Lost... Oh, souls. They keep deleting comments and holding them for moderation. And then there's shills planted throughout the comment chains. But this has definitely gotten the 40k community riled. I can't wait to see what shit is going to go down. I hate it. My brother has said this before to me and to others. But some of the only places left where you can try to actually discuss Warhammer 40k without using kitty terms. It's not even on any forums. It's on 4chan and 8chan, and those are slowly being overtaken by normies and Polacks, respectively. So this is going to become a tremendously polarized issue with no one actually understanding many of the talking points involved. And I don't know, 40k is probably doomed. Most of the fan base is probably going to be drowned in shaming and buzzwords, and going to be isolated and cut off, divided and conquered. In the grim darkness of the 21st century, there is only feminism.